Hello and welcome to News Express, exclusively brought to you by Business AM, Nigeria's fastest growing financial and business newspaper. I am Chukunonso Modi. Now let's take a look at the stories hitting the front page this week. Now the first one, the big story, 38.1 trillion naira knee on our necks. Nigeria piles on debt in run-up to lame duck presidency year with poor capex profile. Sub-headlines, analysts raise concerns over Nigeria's vulnerable low debt to GDP ratio, fiscal sustainability. Another sub-headline, World Bank says Nigeria EMDs risked $324.7 million savings in 2021 from debt initiative. There's an interesting one. Second headline, can Shell come clean of culpability in 800 billion naira spill judgment debt? Now sub-headlines, 10 post-judgment interest takes payment northward of 1 trillion naira. Appeal court rules in January 2022 and Shell paid 45 billion naira for a Gemma Bobu spill after 31 years. You might like to look at the finance and investment corner with headline decelerating inflation still bites deep. Then also technology and innovation, Safe Border gets Google's first release. Under commodities and agriculture, we see story on aluminium in 3-week high. Then, of course, executive knowledge series, why allyship is key to gender balance. And, of course, look at Project Syndicate with GDP's days are numbered. Now, let's bring in Philip Isakba, the publisher Business AM, to help us make sense of the headlines. Good morning, Philip.
Yeah, good morning, Chinon. So good to be back here. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you too?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, so let's look at the first headline. It says Nigeria piles on debt in run-up to lame duck presidency year. Now, an official public debt pile-up by the federal government and state governments has raised to 38.01 trillion naira at the last time of counting by the Debt Management Office, and it is being described by analysts as a knee on the necks of Nigerians in the lead up to 2022, which is the lame duck year of the Muhammadu Buhari Presidency. In fact, the analysts as well likened it to the I Can't Breathe by the late George Floyd. The black American who the white racist police officer had placed his knee on his neck. Now, please shed more light on this, Mr. Philip. And most importantly, why are we still borrowing?
Well, we have to look at this from a broad perspective.
Okay.
First of all, you are borrowing. Nigeria is borrowing because it doesn't have money. We know all what has gone down, from 2016 when we had the recession,
okay,
to another recession again. We have had two recessions in a short space of time, and then you had COVID-19 that came. 2020 was a bad year. We keep talking about Nigeria. Globally, there was this supply was serious problem with global economies all over the world, not just Nigeria, and Nigeria being a mono product economy, highly dependent on crude oil exports for foreign exchange, and then being also vulnerable to imports because it's an import dependent country. It's not making enough money domestically. Revenues are down. You've heard of all what has gone down regarding tax to GDP ratio that they keep talking about, and how government has been trying to widen the net, to be able to bring in more people onto the tax bracket, So Nigeria is poor. Poor in terms of revenues. The revenues not creating very well, not highly, and then. Because you don't have money, of course, and then you have some things you have to deal with. You go borrowing, especially when you have some capital expenditures capital projects to spend money on.
Yeah.
So that's been the story. But unfortunately, you've had a very high what's called running cost. Not just borrowing to also to finance the capital projects, but also borrowing to just keep going. In terms of running costs. So that's been a major problem. Now we have a serious situation hands because last week the Debt Management Office, which midwives all the debts that Nigeria, Nigeria's the federal government, the state government, and everybody, borrowing. All the borrowings put together, they've come up with this number, 38. So that should be 38.01 trillion naira. And it's just a humongous thing, because we've had this piling up consistently, for a very long time.
Yes.
First of all, you have budgets that have been in deficit for a very long time, and then those deficits have to be dealt with by through borrowings, whether you're borrowing from China, whether you're borrowing from the World Bank, or whether you're borrowing from the IMF or different places. So there have been that challenge. Now, this is a serious one, because it's the debts are piling up. We had the House of Rep approve some new borrowings
yes,
even last
exactly.
week. And then it's a run up, so it's a run up to the election year, because even though we talk about the election being 2023, the real action, the real attention, all the focus will come up next year, when everybody will start jostling, and then we'll forget so many things, and everybody will be on the soapbox trying to see who will either win get the primary, get the nominations of their parties, and so on, to become president. So attention will focus on that. So that's why we say it's a lame duck presidency year. It's a year where the presidency won't be, even though things will be going on, they might be trying to do a few things,
but they won't be focused.
All attention, they won't be focused, so everything will shift to the elections that will be coming up, and the president isn't going to be running again for he might as well be getting himself ready to get out of Aso Rock, and then go to his to Daura in Katsina State, and so we're saying, what's going to happen. So many analysts are concerned about what's going on. First of all, they talk about the vulnerability of how vulnerable the low debt to GDP ratio is, because even if you say, it's low debt to GDP ratio, because people have come up to say, it's not that high. It's the debt to GDP ratio is low, but again, analysts say, even though it's low, it's vulnerable, because you have debt service, debt service to GDP or to income. So you are paying a lot. We've talked about. I think there was a figure that came up the other time that had it as I think at 93 or 97%. Of what you earn, being used to service debt. So even though you have a low debt to GDP ratio, you have a challenge in terms of what's it called, the servicing.
Yes.
If you place service to revenue ratio, that's really difficult to come back, and then it's not fiscally sustainable. Some of them have said,
yes.
And there's so many things that are going on with regards to this debt. That you have. A debt pile up, putting at least 170 million Nigerians in the infamous "I can't breathe." Because if you were to spread this debt, across Nigeria, Nigerians, to say, okay, you take your own share of the debt, you'll find that it's going to be a serious challenge. If you look at it person per person in terms of per capita debt, if you were to measure that's the real challenge that we have at the moment.
Yeah, this is really a serious issue. The World Bank is also saying that Nigeria and EMDs risk $324.7 million savings in 2021 from that initiative. That's a lot.
Yes, there's something about what that really talking about is that there was an initiative that could have allowed some that the World Bank came up with, to allow some countries to spend the payment, service payment, So give you what I think what they try to do is to create a breather, for low income countries and emerging market and developing countries to have a breather. So they came up with that, and then if they had gone to do that, they would have had what's it called, the World Bank said that these countries, if you had subscribed to that, I think Nigeria did not agree to subscribe to it. But if they had done that, all of them, including Nigeria, would have had a cushion. They will have been able to save, because all you do, I think, is that involves suspending, working around the debt servicing that you pay. And then when you do that, that the savings that could have accrued would have been in the region of $324.7 million, that these countries have been able to save, and Nigeria would have been one of them. But apparently, Nigeria refused to participate in what they call the temporary suspension of debt service payments, because I think it's always Nigeria always comes to the point where this, we believe that we can keep just going on, instead of suspending. Because on one hand, you can say, if we suspended, then there will be a challenge in terms of you still have to pay it back anyway, but the savings, it depends on what you do with the savings. If you are giving yourself a cushion, if you're resting for a couple of say 1 or 2 years, you could save that money and use it to do something, instead of borrowing to do what you plan to do, But then, it could be something that the government officials will have thought, it's insignificant. I don't know, because if you talk about $324.7 million, you're looking at it not for Nigeria alone, across different countries. Perhaps they looked at it and saw that it didn't come to much, and then that it's something that they could deal with, So many challenges. The debt. Some analysts were saying that when we turn to debt service in the context of revenue generation, then the picture becomes worse than its peers, because that is where the problem is. Revenues are very poor, the revenues are very low, but the debt, you've borrowed, you've leveraged yourself on borrowings, and then you have to pay you have to service those debts, but you're not generating enough money, so you are spending there's a statistic that said, I think 97%, and then very alarming, I think it was last year, you use 97% of your revenues to debt, what then will you do? And if you look at it, you say, one of the key things that, about the story is also talking about capex expenditure, so you've borrowed quite a lot, but people do not see it in terms of capital expenditure, you should expect that a lot of the borrowings will be on capital projects. So every part of the country, everywhere will be what they call a work site. It's capital development going on in every part of the country. But analysts are saying that this is not showing. The borrowing, the huge amount of money that have been borrowing. And then we aggregate it. It's not just the federal government. It's not just external loans that are coming. We're talking about the entire debt profile, and if you look at it in that regard, you say, capital expenditure is not putting a dent on capital expenditure numbers, because you expect that a lot of things will be happening in the area of projects going on all over the place. So that is a concern. That is worrying, because it's important that what you borrow, it's showing in terms of because when you borrow, you have to be sure that that money the borrow can repay itself, over time. And a lot of the times, you find out that if you put the money in consumption, then it's not likely to if you borrow and it's mostly going into consumption, then it's not likely to yield returns for you to pay back. But there will be project that you put the money and then you get returns from the money which you can use to pay back. So that's been a challenge. for the economy over the years, not just with this administration, but over many administrations in the past, and that's been worrying for analysts and very concerning for a country that wants to develop and make progress with the rest of the world.
True, very true. Now, this brings me to this question, Mr. Philip. In your opinion, will this continuous borrowing end? Will it ever end? Because like you mentioned earlier, last week, the House of Assembly just approved another borrowing. So is there any way forward, anything that any part of the federal government, in fact, Muhammadu Buhari's presidency, can take to end this continuous borrowing? Because it's more like we're borrowing and borrowing, and like analysts are saying, we're having poor capex profile. We're not seeing what we're borrowing that money for. So is it ever going to end?
Well, I mean, you can decide to. You can get into a position where you can decide to starve yourself, or you can decide to say what are the other options, available. If the government has taken a position, this government has taken a position that it's going to so borrow its way out of its problems, so that's what it's been doing, borrow its way out of the economic challenges. There has been particularly some successes that you expect to be made with regards to diversifying the economy.
Yes.
There hasn't been the serious push that we thought we would see, in terms of opening up the economy in such a way that you find that activities are going on across different aspects of the economy, not just in the oil and gas sector, in crude oil production. So the talk about diversification, has been one that has been mounted a lot, over the years. The administration came on board and was very bullish about diversifying the economy, But data that came out, I think last week as well. I think last week we had this what's called trade data that came out, and we found that nothing has happened. We're still an import-dependent country, and then we find that I think it was a week or 2 weeks ago that you still have oil and gas, constituting up to 88%, of the revenues that was generated from our trade activities, So nothing really has. I mean, the goal and the goalpost hasn't been moved so much. You understand? So I don't think you've had a serious. What's it called? Data haven't shown seriousness in terms of this diversification things.
Yes.
So there has to be a new approach to it, because the key thing is that you have to generate revenues. Again, government has tried to say, okay, generating revenues will be taxation. Last week you and I talked about how the plan is that from January 1st, the government, the treasury and the federal government will go all out, to try to raise revenues.
Yes.
But the key thing is that an economy has to function on autopilot.
Yes.
Serious activities going on. For you to be able to find comfort in taxing people, because if there isn't activities, if you don't have activities going on, economic activities taking place, you have nobody to tax, and you have nothing to tax. So that's key thing. So the economy has to be needs to function properly.
Yeah.
The diversification thing, the encouragement that you need is needed. They need to encourage. Find a better way to encourage activities going on outside the oil and gas sector. The concentration on oil and gas is just too much. For them to have their eyes on other things. So proper policies in place. To encourage activities taking place in other places, so that revenues can be generated, so that the economy can be much diversified in terms of revenue accretion for government, so that has been a major challenge, and it will take a government to come in, to say, okay, we are going to, when they say we're going to cut our coat according to our cloth or tighten our belt, you have to shut your eyes or shut your mouth to certain things, and say we will not be going this route again. We will focus this way, and that's how we're going to deal with the problem. So there has to be the will, the will on the part of government to cut costs. There are so many areas for cost to be cut. In terms, the running of government is expensive. It's very expensive. It's been way too expensive for what the economy is worth. The economy it's a small economy really. Even though it's giant, the biggest in Africa, it's still small when you look at it in terms of the numbers that come out of the economy. So you will have to have that what's it called, will, on the part of government to say we are cutting down, we are getting serious, and we are going to face this thing headlong. If you can stop borrowing, you can say you can borrow for proper things. You can borrow to finance sectors that you need to generate revenues from. But the key thing is that revenues have to be generated, and the economy needs to function properly. And every aspect of the economy needs to be looked at. Not ignored. And all the incentives that need to be put in place need to be put in place and need to be encouraged. And then needs to be properly supervised to ensure that everything is working, and there's a goal for everybody to look forward to.
Okay, all right. So let's quickly move to the second headline, as time is not on our side. Now, can Shell come clean of culpability in 800 billion naira spill judgment debt? Now, this Shell issue is the biggest dispute award ever in Nigeria's volatile oil industry. It was awarded an 800 billion naira dispute debt that occurred on swamp farmlands in Egbalo, Ibubu in Eleme local government area of Rivers State. One thing we have to note is that Shell is not new to oil spill dispute debt awards like this, and with the characteristics of the company, it often takes matters to the stretch for many years before it makes a final debt payment. Now, the big question, can they come clean of culpability, Mr. Philip?
Well, there's a judgment already.
Okay.
The judgment has found them culpable, which has first of all put 800 billion naira as a payment. That's massive.
Yes,
that's massive.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have you then have a 10% post judgment interest. That could easily take it not
1
worth
trillion.
of 1 trillion. Now, yes, I was speaking to a source in London yesterday, about this, and what the source said was that this is amazing that Shell, this is not about just Shell Nigeria, it's Shell Global.
Yes.
So you are looking at this source in London said to me, Philip, I'm surprised that there's a case like this that is talking about $2 billion, and that Shell allowed it to go this way. You understand? So because once this thing gets out there, this is huge for the bottom line of Shell.
Yes.
It's not just Shell Nigeria, it's Shell International, Shell Global, and you see some reactions on the stock exchanges, whether it's New York or whether it's London, responding, to this, because if this were to go on, they are appealing against this. There are some aspects of the appeal that judgment will come in next month, January 2022. But the key thing is that people we spoke to who are familiar with the approach that Shell uses is that it's for this to be long drawn out. So they could have. Some would tell you that they could have nipped this in the bud from the beginning,
yes.
Open up and then say what can be done, but it goes to court and then there's this huge 800 billion naira judgment against them. and then because of that, I mean, they're going to be reacting, in Holland, in London, where Shell Africa and the global headquarters in Holland, will respond. The Netherlands will respond to this, But the thing is that Shell has a way of drawing out this, The one you have there is it was a judgment, a JAMA, a Bubu spill, that dragged on for 31 years, So
that long.
The idea is for this to drag on, they'll go to the Court of Appeal. I mean, they take it to Supreme Court, and then, of course, the amount, a figure has already been given, and that figure is huge. You're not talking about 100 billion, you're not talking about 50 billion, that even if you want to drag it, you're talking about 800 billion, talking about potentially 1 trillion naira and potentially $2 billion or so, and that's massive for even if it's a big global player in the oil and gas business.
Okay. We are really thankful that this did not drag as long as 31 years and it was quick, and Shell actually accepted the verdict. Also, experts on environment are also maintaining that the oil giant should learn to mix commerce with morality.
That is the key thing, because all of this, the Niger Delta, a region, has suffered a lot from oil and gas companies' activities.
Yes.
This was a spill that happened in this area. So the idea, about, the idea of creating a situation that you would not respond to, it's you think about just the business and not the moral aspect of it. But Shell, to be fair to Shell, they have come up with some statements, last year, this year, in terms of their environmental credentials, they have said that they are going to turn a new leaf,
Yes. Yeah,
but
true.
so this will be a test case, because there's still, even while we are talking, that area is still affected by that spill. They haven't done remediation, which is one of the one aspect of the judgment that Shell needs to go back there and clean up the place. The other thing is to also say that it's not just Shell. Shell is usually the operator of the whatever the assets,
yes.
But you still have that it's always that it's always JVs. The Nigerian government is also culpable because it owns some percentages of those oil what's it called, mining leases or whatever it is that they have.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you, Mr. Philip. We'll see how the stories develop this week.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
That was Philip Isakba, the publisher of Business AM, Nigeria's fastest growing financial and business newspaper. That's all for now. Stay tuned for more.